I went to the county commission debate last Wednesday.
And how was that?
It was interesting. And the mayor made a pitch for Proposition 1 there, and I thought they did a good job of pitching it, although I've heard some good counter-arguments to it. So it bears a little bit of investigation on your part before you go to the ballot box, Proposition 1 does.
Do we want to go into Proposition 1, or do we want to go into...
No, we don't, because my pulse is really elevated today.
You are.
I am, a little bit.
I could de-escalate you.
I feel like Dorothy,
but
you
I don't
know,
want that to happen.
standing by the Oz machine and seeing a pair of shoes behind
Suddenly
the curtains.
you see the man behind the curtain.
I see the shoes.
So what's so what do those shoes represent for you?
Well,
let's put some context to this. Okay.
All right.
You're Dorothy the voter.
Dorothy the voter, yes.
And the shoes, the man behind the curtain is what?
The system I live in.
Jen, you're starting to sound like me on our last show.
I know, it's contagious.
Rubbing off on you. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's you know, the more I think about it, you know, earlier shows we were talking about the candidates a little bit, and then we decided we were going to look at ourselves and do a little self-investigation. We're the other half of the conversation. We have the candidates, one half, and we're the other half as the voters, and start looking at ourselves. And it's becoming more and more distressing the more I look in the mirror, so to speak, as a voter. And I really think the mess we're in now, politically, is really a referendum on us as the American voters.
So you're using a big 25-cent four-syllable word there,
I know.
referendum.
I teach college, you know.
You do. we both do that way. At the risk of being the intellectuals as well in an increasingly anti-intellectual environment.
Right.
But what do you mean by referendum?
Well, okay, so...
A referendum on the voters. What do you mean by that?
Well, it reflects on us. It's a mirror on who we are as engaged or disengaged citizens that we've come to this situation. It's not the fault of candidates, and we can lay some of the blame on our leadership, but we are the ones that keep our leadership in positions of leadership. So ultimately it falls to us. We have ourselves to blame for this predicament. So and it makes me unhappy to think that.
So we're responsible for our current morass.
Yes.
Can I say that on TV?
Yes.
Of our current political and campaigning.
Right, and as Dorothy the voter, you know, in the land of Oz, I see the shoes below the curtains, and I've been reading one book called Democracy for Realists, written by two writers, Aiken and Bartels, both of, I think, Princeton and Vanderbilt universities, respectively. And Democracy for Realists just came out last year, and it basically says our version of democracy, they call it folk democracy, where we have an informed electorate, is a myth. That's a polite way of saying it's a myth. There's no such thing.
Ask you to define informed electorate as well. We've kind of beaten that horse a little bit on previous shows, what it means to be informed and how critical that is, not just from a standpoint of voting, but also from a standpoint of civil discourse amongst individuals who don't agree. We come hopefully to a higher understanding, maybe even a higher purpose in what those ideas might be, or what those referendums might be, if we have the chance to talk it out and see all sides with that. So what you're saying then is we lack that ability. There's no such thing as a rational voter.
Well, informed is part of the problem. Remember, I think earlier we were saying, well, you just need to be more informed. We just need to be more informed as voters. We can make better decisions. I've decided that that's really not how we make decisions. It's not based on being informed.
Well, it's certainly not enough. It's got to start there with the issues, but then, well, okay, I'm going down to even more definitions.
Okay.
What does being informed mean?
That means you first of all, you understand how your government works. Let's start really basic, you know, the three branches of government.
Civics.
Yes, standard civics, right? How your government works, what your Constitution says, the Bill of Rights. For example, what do those documents say? Okay, that's some level of information. Then you want to know you want to understand your own value system. We talked about that Potter matrix of ethical decision making. So you want to know what your value system is, what policies would be derived from the value system that you have, and then who you elect as a result of that.
So you're indicating that an informed voter then has their own standpoint based on a working understanding of government, legislative, executive, judicial, based on how they agree or disagree with the ethical operations of that and the morals and values imbued within the system in terms of legislation, what kind of laws and how they're enforced and what's going on with that. once we've established that base, though, and then we have candidates that come to us with different positions, say on foreign policy, on the economy, on immigration, whatever, do we then assume that whatever platform they're bringing to us as an informed electorate, that that's the truth of that platform?
Well, that's the problem. We have our own attachment to what the truth is. So instead of being logical and rational and evaluating information, what we are doing, in fact, is not that. We are being emotional, and we are voting for people based on some identity politics, like who's the representative of my social group, and it's mostly who do I trust? Because what you'll find is you'll find people saying, well, I don't trust so-and-so, they're a liar.
Yeah, see, I don't know that we're even operating on those levels of values anymore, because we certainly don't trust either presidential candidate at this point. But we've been willing to go through and dismiss that and go through and adopt other characteristics about them that still ring true on some level with us. And you nailed this when you said it rings true with us emotionally and not necessarily logically. So this is where I want to talk about that default attitudinal response that we have.
What do you mean by default attitudinal response?
Default attitudinal. We have default attitudes that we automatically spring to.
For example?
Well, I can walk into a classroom at the beginning of a semester and I could say these two words, Barack Obama. And when I do, I can see default attitudes poke up within the facial expressions of my students.
Okay.
They either love them or they hate them. Okay. There's very little wiggle room in between there.
Okay.
And that's an emotional response just to the words. And I could use Donald Trump, I could use Hillary Clinton, and the same response is going to happen because we've already made up our minds. Well, I should say, we've already made up our emotional centers. I can't call it our hearts, our emotional centers about how we feel about them, regardless of what their politic is. Right?
And so by default, you mean it's an unexamined...
It's unexamined. It's a primary certitude.
Okay.
It's something that's been pounded into our heads over the course of a certain period of time on a regular basis. And once we get used to that kind of desensitization to being more critical to things, we give up that provisional perspective. We're no longer thinking beyond what they represent to us, what they mean to us emotionally, as opposed to what they're saying logically. And is that really the best thing, not just for me, but is that the best thing for the country?
Okay.
We give that up. That's the idea of primary certitude. And then we get into hidden presumptions. So I'm the child of a relatively political home.
Okay.
As I recall, my father was a pretty dedicated Republican. My mother would kind of swing over to the Democrat side.
Did you talk politics in your house growing up?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know how rational it was, because there were default opinions being
subject
expressed
of
there.
interest,
Right.
though. Okay.
What I'm saying, though, is I could easily adopt their politics, which I did for some time.
Okay.
That becoming a hidden presumption, right? So much like the primary certitude that I hear over and over and over again, and then I accept that and I no longer question that, the hidden presumption really is based on some level of conditioning that we've gone through because of certain influences like religion,
right,
or the sociality of our education system, what's happening there, the area that I lived in. I lived in the East Bay area of California, which at the time was relatively liberal and coming out. So those things add up to the third default type of thinking, which is ethnocentrism.
Okay.
Our land is better than your land. Our Jesus is better than your Jesus, whatever the case might be. And we have a tendency based on that ethnocentrism. If you are within that same ethnocentric circle as I am, then we have some kind of agreement, some kind of collusion.
And we can trust each other.
We can trust each other. That's exactly where I was going. We can trust each other with what we're thinking.
Okay.
Therefore, when you give me your opinion, I have no reason to vet it.
Right. And when I give you my opinion, if it agrees with yours, I'm a patriot like you are.
Right.
You know, it's patriot correctness, patriotic correctness. Yes, okay.
I'm going to have you scoot forward just a little bit. We are dealing with we thought doing the show here in the Holland Building live on Dixie State's campus would be a nice place.
It is a nice place. It just has special challenges.
We get dogged by that sunshine.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
I just want to be out of your shot that way
Okay.
as we go along. So
Okay.
when the time changes, we'll have this all taken care of. So bear with us as we go along. Anyway, where were we?
Okay, so we were just talking about primary certitudes, default attitudinal responses.
So those things, those
yes.
three ideas
Okay.
add up to just default thinking. Well, I
Okay.
can't even call it thinking. Just
Okay.
a default response
Okay.
on how we might go through and listen to what a particular candidate is saying. The problem with those default responses is they have no provisional room. Provisional, by that I mean open-mindedness. They have no room for us to go through and say, maybe they're not telling the truth about that particular issue, or maybe they're just kind of pulling those numbers out of the air, or maybe there's no foundation to their argument.
Mm-hmm.
If we default to, well, I like you because we have some level of alignment emotionally or in values, or whatever the case might be, I have no reason to go through and question you, then why do I need to listen to anybody else?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I hear criticisms about my particular candidate, instead of going through and saying, addressing those particular criticisms, I'll go through and take whatever might be 180 degrees out of phase of that candidate, which might be the other candidate's position, and throw that back. And so now we're not even having a real civil discussion or even a debate. We're just into lobbying.
So that reminds me of a
facts,
conversation I
ideas back
had
and forth.
the other day with
Facts.
my local precinct chair, who said to me, well, you have to vote for Donald Trump because we can't have Hillary. And I said, well, here's my objections to Donald Trump. And every time I raised a specific objection, he brought up Hillary Clinton, her defaults. And I said, I'm not talking about her. I want to talk about why I can't vote for Donald Trump.
And
but
then you're accused of deflecting.
We couldn't have a conversation about Donald Trump's merits or lack of merit because this other thing kept like superseding it. And I think it's the other way around too. People who are terrified of a Donald Trump presidency can't really vet Hillary Clinton because it's too dangerous.
It's too dangerous too. We don't
Yes.
want to know
Yeah.
that there might be some dark side to her
Right.
because we're putting all our eggs in that Hillary basket
yeah.
just to beat Trump.
Yeah, and it brings me back to this anger that I'm putting back on myself. Like, where have I been the last 63, 62 years, however old I am? Where have I been all these years, and what have I been doing that's perpetuated or that's brought us to this point as far as being a citizen? And I'm saying to myself, well, there is no such thing as this folk democracy. There's no such thing as this informed
So you're blowing
voters.
up a myth right here.
Yeah.
No such thing
Yeah.
as folk democracy. Well, then
Yeah.
what are we doing?
Well, what we're doing is we're pretending there is that. We're pretending there's an informed electorate. If they just got more engaged, if they just got more informed, we'd have a better government.
So what's the reality? Let's remove pretense
Yeah.
then and examine this for what it truly
Okay,
is.
so
And what is
according to
it?
Bartels and Aiken, right?
Let's scoot up
Okay,
a little
scoot
more.
up some more.
Like a lot more. Let's get way
Okay.
into the shadow
All right.
while
All
our
right.
crew goes through and
Figures
pulls
it out.
focus and
Okay.
gets that back together
So
again.
according to Bartels and Aiken in Democracy for Realists, we have to dispense with the lie. I mean, that's a polite way. Myth is a polite way of saying a lie. Once we figure out that it's not operating the way we wish it was or we've been saying it was, and figure out how it is operating, which is that we vote with our emotions, we're subject to emotional decision making, then once we figure that out, we'll figure out better how to manage that and be less vulnerable to these emotional decisions that we're making. So according to them, well, what came up for me was, okay, then that explains to me why some of the rhetoric we're hearing from candidates is so effective and so powerful. And I'm thinking of the emotional appeal that a lot of candidates offer up. Lack of credible facts, but all to the emotion. And because that candidate knows that's how we're going to make a decision as a voter. They don't have to worry about appealing to logic and reason because we're not using that in our decision-making process.
So what happens to facts then within that type of...
Well, and that's another thing. Okay, I had somebody I respect the other day say to me, you know, those fact-checking sites, they're just propaganda. And I saw this quote from Rush Limbaugh the other
I was
day.
going to say, wait, Rush Limbaugh said that.
Yeah, but so did somebody else I'm related to. I don't even want to like out them on, on YouTube, right?
Okay.
Somebody I respect. And they said to me, though, those fact-checking sites are biased. They're spinners. And that's what Rush Limbaugh said. He said, they're just a way to manipulate you. And here's what it comes down to.
To form
Who
opinions.
am I supposed to trust? And you know why? The basic thing is the trust between us, the voter, has been broken with the institutions that we have been relying on. The trust is broken, and it's partly because of government's poor response to the economic meltdown and lack of enforcement,
But more recently, fingers have been pointed to the fourth estate in terms of the press.
Okay, yeah, the press. Yeah, what's their role in it? We talked about that a little bit last time.
We
right?
did.
Yeah.
In fact, I called for a reform on some level of journalism and what has to happen there. And I decided to investigate that a little bit more since I went through and made that declaration on the show and wanted to see, so how do journalists feel about the current climate? I mean, we're talking about one candidate, Donald Trump, who, if he had his druthers, would do away with certain First Amendment issues as far as a free press is concerned. And that's duly frightening. The press who show up to Trump rallies are booed. There's a little bit of violence in terms of shoving. They have to have protections of the Secret Service to get in and out of venues because they're constantly demonized. Now, certainly, we don't live in a democracy where all the press is bad, where we're always being lied to. Any term of extreme that shows up in somebody's rhetoric, like always or never, should be indicative to you, the viewer, to you, the voter, that that's
a red
just
flag.
not true.
Yeah, that's a red
These
flag.
are terms of extreme, and nobody ever,
Right.
always or never does anything.
Right.
I think that's right. Let's put that out there. My point being, when we speak in terms of extreme, it has a tendency to go through and radicalize what's happening within that environment.
And that's
what
an
happens.
emotional appeal, isn't it?
Absolutely, that's an
Emotional
emotional
appeal.
appeal. So,
Okay.
and that's where we get into trouble. So we have members of the press, and good members of the press, who now are also getting discouraged because even though they might be reporting on the facts, they're not being taken that way. They're not being interpreted as, oh, well, now here's somebody that I can go to because I trust what it is that they're saying, where all of the pundits around that individual, because they might be counter to what that individual is saying, are claiming that they're lying.
Well, so, for example, Rush Limbaugh was complaining that
Rush Limbaugh is not a journalist.
Oh, no, wait a minute. A lot of people trust him and rely
He's not
on.
a journalist.
Well, who are you to say? He's talk
Well,
radio.
I studied journalism.
Okay.
He's not a journalist.
Okay, and why isn't he a
He's an
journalist?
entertainer.
An infotainer.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Along with Bill O'Reilly,
Okay.
along with
They certainly,
Rachel Maddow.
they certainly pass themselves off as journalists.
Well, of course. They're opinion leaders. They're framers of
Okay.
information. They tell you how to think.
They do.
And that's
Yeah.
what a journalist does not do. A journalist
Okay.
puts out the evidence and says, make up your own mind.
Okay.
Where these other folks are saying, well, let me form your opinion for you because I've done the thinking for you. So you
Okay.
can go ahead.
That
sounds
sounded
familiar.
Yes. Okay, so you were saying about the claims about the media then, and you were making distinctions between levels of reform that are needed or not needed and so on. Okay.
Yeah. Well, so what
Yeah.
I'm saying is the legitimate press is getting not only tired of this, but I think a little bit paranoid
Okay.
that the whole concept of a free press is at some kind of precipice that if heaven forbid, Donald Trump is elected president of the United States, that is going to become at risk. The
Well,
concept of a free
It
press.
is kind of curious because, under the Obama administration, there has been a clampdown on information. Whistleblowers prosecuted, and I think some journalists and media people hurt,
Is it because
Yeah.
they were impinging on the popularity of Barack Obama?
I don't know that much about that. Yeah.
They were issues of national security.
Okay. Right. And so how much do we have a right to know as the American
Yeah, absolutely.
citizens?
At what point?
Yeah.
Again, we can get into the security privacy
Right.
debate as we go back and forth. So let me go back then
Okay.
to, I guess, the direction that we're trying to go into
Okay.
in terms of the referendum on the voter. What does
Okay.
that mean?
Okay, so-
we have, sorry.
Go ahead.
We have, we don't know what facts are because we don't trust anybody who's reporting on facts, and we have this kind of rhetoric coming from folks like
And apparently we don't
Limbaugh.
care. We don't care about facts.
Okay,
We don't
because
use
we're
them.
making
Yeah.
that default response instead of some type of a provisional response to what it is that we're here. So what does this mean? We're 13 days away from that voting booth. For some of you, for many of you, in fact, in the state of Utah, you've already cast your ballot. You stuck it in the mail and away you've gone. So it's a done deal. My point being, in 13 days, we're going to have a pretty clear idea what that decision is. Does what you and I are talking about right now change that process on any level? Or should we just call it good and go home?
For me, it helps me now that I realize how much of my voting decisions is based on my emotions. It helps me spot when I am being manipulated better.
Good.
So it helps me do a little more vetting of people and then be more sensitive to, are they appealing to my emotions, or are there some facts that I should care about? So, but
what do you do when those two things clash?
Then I have to say to myself, why are you insisting on voting for somebody when the logic and the facts don't add up? And why do you believe some people's version of the truth and not trust others? And it really comes down to this broken trust that I'm talking about. I'm not sure who to trust anymore as far as telling me the truth. And I think a lot of people may be feeling the same way. There's too much contradictory information. And we're living in a world where we have to do a lot more of our own thinking. When we were younger, you were talking earlier about CBS News and Walter Cronkite. We could all go to bed at night having just heard the truth and not having to question the truth because Walter Cronkite gave it to us. And that's not the world we're in now.
No, it's flipped around. We are now the producers, or maybe a better term for that is editors. We're the ones who decide what sticks to us and what doesn't, because we're getting inundated by opinions and facts from all sides as they come in. And so we have to go through and decide based on what we read, based on the visual impact of what we're seeing, and not understanding perhaps what is out of the frame versus what is included in the frame, and how does that editorialize within the story as well. There's so many different influences, and now there's nobody out there to go through and shape that for us. There's nobody producing that for us. We have to go through and look at all those different channels and go through and say, I see where this is true. I have 2 or 3 different sources that say the same thing, and I've vetted those sources enough for me to trust what it is that they're saying. I understand that the video of the lone Syrian boy in the blue chair of the ambulance is entirely heartbreaking. And yet, is that going to cloud my judgment on America's involvement in Syria, or do I allow myself to be taken in by the tragedy of that, or do I have the ability to go through and say, somebody's producing this to me in order to get me to respond on a level that I, as you said, where I might in fact be manipulated? And that's not to say that the picture of the little Syrian boy is out there for manipulation. But what I am saying is it sure tugs at the heartstrings.
It sure does. And when you were saying that, I was finding myself thinking, you were talking about vetting sources and spending some time, actually. I was thinking, who has the most time on their hands right now as a segment of the population? And I was thinking people that are retired, now they're not working full-time jobs and going to school full-time, have a very valuable resource that a lot of us do not have, and that's time that's not claimed by survival. And I feel like saying to people in my generation and older, you have a role to play in still shaping this society that we live in and the world that the future generations are going to inherit. What are you doing? Seriously, what are you doing with your time that is more valuable than helping clarify what needs to happen in our country? Because it takes, why are you laughing?
You want us to go through and trust the baby boomers?
Well, I'm just saying they have the means.
They have the means.
To make
they
a
have
contribution.
The time, but
yes.
Clearly, they don't have the desire.
Well,
with the mess that's been created by our generation, and
right.
I'll throw myself into that. I'm kind of in the back door of the baby boomers as it goes. We have done no favors for anybody in terms of the economy, in terms of the environment, or in terms of the body politic.
Well, maybe we didn't realize how poorly we were performing until it's so in our faces now.
Again, I have to chuckle at that because I have older generations within my family who are as provisionally blind, deaf, and dumb as people are blaming millennials to be.
Yes. So it's time to repent. That's all I can say.
Repent.
It is. I'm totally serious about that.
You baby boomers.
We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and we have to say, really? Am I not taking any responsibility for this mess?
Yeah.
Really, am I not? And if I'm willing to take some responsibility, what am I going to do about it?
So you're asking us to go through, examine where we're coming from, make some kind of logical examination of our beliefs, our values, our attitudes, look at what our own standpoint might be on that issue, and put aside emotion, and then make a decision? Is that what
Well, you're asking like that's a completely like ridiculous or irrational claim,
Well,
and that feeds right into Bartels and Aiken. There's no such thing as a rational, logical voter, and that we're all just wired to be emotional. You know, and frankly, anybody who votes for a candidate that says they're going to fix everything, I think is a lazy
Well, they're voting in a demagogue.
person. They're voting, a demagogue is what? A person who says their claims are going to fix everything.
Without anybody else's help. It's
Right.
just going to be them.
They're going to fix it, and they appeal to your emotions. That's a demagogue.
that's a demagogue.
And that's why they're effective, is because we vote with our emotions. And so, frankly, I don't want to hear you whining about it and complaining about the state of the country if you're not doing anything to fix the problem. And I'm.
Are you telling me that? Are you saying that to me?
I'm saying that to myself.
Are you saying that to me?
I'm saying that to you, yes, and to everybody else who is willing to even think about the problem.
Wow.
Yes. And I'm
I've been
looking at
checking our
myself.
Facebook page to see if we have any comments, and I don't even think we
Yeah.
have. Do you have any views out there? Is there? For 3 views.
Wow.
Mine is
Okay.
one of those views. Is yours up as well?
No, I'm
That
not.
way?
So
Okay.
there.
Well, if you do have something to say, please chime in on our Facebook page
Yeah.
of what we've been talking about. Maybe you've been having the same discussion at your dinner table or with a significant other, or
Yeah.
hopefully maybe even your kids, as we get to a point of casting that ballot. So we have one more show before the big day.
Right.
What are we going to talk about?
I don't know. I feel like it's a little overwhelming
Should
at
we
the
get
moment.
into unicorns and rainbows instead?
No,
A total distraction show?
no. But I do want to talk about some of my students who I think are a bright spot and are
Good.
maybe going to set a good example for some of us that have just been really coasting and being kind of lazy.
So you went to Vegas yesterday.
UVU up in Orem.
Oh, you went
Yeah,
to Orem. What was
yeah,
I
I went to
thinking?
Orem. I don't
Holy
know.
cow. Okay.
To UVU, and
Right.
there was a great. It's called She Talks Utah. And we had 5 women leaders, sponsored there by the Utah Women in Leadership Project and Utah Women in Higher Education people. Susan Madsen is the ringleader, if you will.
And you provided this as an opportunity for your students to go along with
I
you.
took, and one of my students took me up on it. We drove up there and back all the way from St. George, so it was kind of a late night. But it was inspiring, and basically those people are suggesting that we need more women in positions of leadership in our country and in our state. And they were encouraging young women and older women to see themselves as leaders.
Yeah.
There's a lot of support for that.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very worthy effort.
Helen Fisher, an anthropologist, has indicated we have more female producers now than ever before. In fact, they hold the majority in terms of news production, and so feels that we're getting more of a big picture. Well, we got 15 seconds to go. You've been watching Talking Point Live. The views and opinions we've expressed are just ours. They don't belong to Dixie State University or the Community Education Channel. We want to say thanks to the crew for going through and putting up with the sunshine and us. And we want to thank you for joining us. Hope to see you on Facebook. We'll see you next Wednesday at 9 o'clock.